Hello, I'm Dapper Dan Gavosden, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which definitely count.
And I'm mischievous Mark Ginocchio, and I too own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, but the annuals don't count. Um, but do the giant size ones
I
do?
mean, that's the claim that you've been making, Mark. You've been making that claim.
Yeah, I know, but then this issue, I don't know.
Now it's a quality thing. Then I've got a
Yeah,
lot of issues of Amazing Spider-Man to run your way
that's
in terms
true.
of
That's true.
quality.
Let us
Um,
start with the late 90s. No, I'm kidding. Okay, continue,
all
Dan.
right, all right, all right. Well, welcome to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe. Thanks for joining us for this review episode of the Amazing Spider Talk.
Today on the show, Dan and I are going to be discussing Giant Size, Amazing Spider-Man, King's Ransom, #1. This issue was written by Nick Spencer, with art by Roge Antonio, with Carlos Gomez and Zay Carlos, colors by Alex Sinclair, and letters by VC's Joe Caramagna, and a cover by Mark Bagley, John Dell, and Brian Reber. This issue was first released on May 12th, 2021. You can send all complaints to about my pronunciations to amazingspidertalk@gmail.com.
I just think it's funny that we moved from one issue that had two Federicos on it, and now we've got artists both with the name Carlos in their name. Are they hiring based on name? Perhaps. Although I thought the art in this issue was decent.
Yes.
So giant-sized King's Ransom #1. I want to start this off by talking about the format of this book, the
Yeah,
giant
I
size
think
of it
that's
all.
important.
Yeah, I
Hmm.
mean, beyond them missing an opportunity to make this king-sized, which, I mean, come on, it's right there in the name. Like, go for the king-sized one. I guess we're falling back on, on history here. What do we think about these giant-sized issues as like finales to arcs? Which we've got another one coming up with this chameleon story.
Yeah, I mean, Dan, we speculated a bit about this months ago when they announced that this was coming, and we still don't have confirmation if our speculation was correct. But the fact of the matter was, the speculation was coming from a place of, they seem to clearly be rushing towards something, um, and having to put in these giant sized issues in the midst of that is a way to kind of like cheat the shipping schedule a bit and get more content out there. And like for me, like you're reading this and it's making me question like the efficiency of storytelling. I mean, not that this was like a total waste of page count, because it really wasn't, but I don't know, like, you kind of go back over the last few issues and you're like, maybe cut out some of that filler and this could be 3 normal sized issues, or maybe you add the extra and it's 4 normal size. I don't know. But like the fact of the matter is like, this is a tough sell right now. I mean, we're dealing with a couple of conflicting things going on here. I mean, one, you got the extra price tag and the extra page count for this, that's a lot to swallow. And then the second is the fact that they're basically making this book a weekly book right now, kind of a la the Clone Saga years. And you're like, does it need, are the stories epic enough and important enough to warrant that level of content distribution? And frankly, to this point so far, I would say no, they're not. Sorry, but they're not.
I mean, and I'll say part of that is my sympathies to Nick Spencer, who, the last time we had this kind of output this consistently was a rotating team of writers and artists. And we've got a rotating team of artists on this book for sure, but we got one guy that's spearheading it all. And, hats off to him that it is coming out as coherent as it is, because I think quibbles aside about this issue, at least the plotting of it, is pretty solid. I mean, there's some things I would take some issues with, which we will talk about, but I think he's, if there's a reason for the way that this book has been paced, it might just be that one guy is being asked to do the impossible. Because this is a double side. This is 2 issues in one. So we ostensibly got what 4 or 5 issues of Amazing Spider-Man this month worth of content from one guy. So my hat's off to him. I think even just forgetting the speed at which we're asked to buy these books, I did like that this allowed this story to conclude in a longer format in a way that I think allowed a lot of the beats to play out better. But I think you're right. Look, I enjoyed the Robbie Tombstone stuff, but I don't know that we needed like 3 whole issues devoted to that. And I like the costume stuff, but it ends up being pretty inconsequential. So I don't know that we needed to have all of that shoved in here. And I think if you really had an editor that could help you trim these things down, which again, I don't know what's going on in the Spider offices, but it seems very much like it doesn't have an editor that's looking over these things. You wouldn't have to do this big, massive thing. You could have done this in 3 issues and had it be just as satisfying. I'm of 2 minds. I'm like, okay, cool. At least it was allowed to end in a way that I could sit down in one reading and enjoy and feel like we had the pacing that it deserved. But also, like, why are we forcing this upon this creator when additional support could just ferreted out these problems to begin with?
Yeah, and again, like, kind of going back to what I said a few minutes ago. I mean, like, are, are these stories as a whole, it's not that they're bad stories, because they're not. These are fine stories, but like, are these truly like epic enough to be justifying, what's going to turn out to be multiple months of this, like of these, like, yes, it's nice to see these stories resolve in a way where we don't feel like we're kind of like sprinting to the finish in a rushed and haphazard way. But like, frankly, when we go back to some of the storylines where that's happened in recent years, there's stories that were kind of built up with epic fashion, whether it be, the Craven story or Last Remains, or during the Slott era, things like Spider-Verse and, some of those, the Dead No More, where, yeah, you could have used maybe a double-sized issue to kind of wrap it all up. But like, yeah, I mean, this whole little thing between Kingpin and Boomerang, and you bring the new Avengers in, but you really don't use them outside of some punchlines. Like, I mean, this seems pretty standard stuff. Like, it's just a pretty standard Spider-Man story. Like, it feels weird to be spending, putting this much page count and effort into something that's pretty rote at this point. I mean, it's not to say it's bad. But it's pretty standard. This is not like elevated Spider-Man stuff here.
Yeah, and then I'll just speak about sales, because I always think about our conversation with Tom Brennan where he's like, our jobs were saved by that Obama issue.
Yeah.
You look at something like this and you think, oh, well, this must just be a marketing tactic. They're going to charge $5.99 for this thing and sell normal copies and get an extra boost, like double sales, essentially, for that week. And we're all about quarterly returns and blah, 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 blah. But I got to say, for reasons I'll get into shortly, I went to 3 different comic book shops looking for this issue, and all of them had very short supply, like ordered 3 or 4 copies of it, because it was listed as a different series than Amazing Spider-Man. It was listed as giant size #1, and so it was treated as like a one-shot. Now, you could say, like, well, that's shame on those shops for not really following along and reading the solicits and knowing that this was the conclusion to this big story arc. But I also just think, like, is it necessary to give this a #1 and a giant size? Like, it's going to reduce your sales. And, I mean, at least from my anecdotal evidence, which...
Yeah. I mean, similarly, I get an email every Friday night from my comic book shop about like the coming week's releases. So, so I can let them know if I want them to hold anything for me. And, similarly, yeah, like the identifiers on this issue were really kind of vague. So, and I'm assuming they're just probably getting it direct from Diamond or whoever who's like, sending this stuff in right now. And it was like, I think it was like giant size King's Ransom. That was what it was listed as, and I was kind of like, and I initially forgot to hold it. I asked for Heroes Reborn, Peter Parker Shutterbug or whatever, because I actually recognized the character names, and then I had to go back and say, oh wait, I also, because I think you reminded me that Giant Size comes out this week. I'm like, oh, that's right. And then I went back. I was like, oh, I need the King's Ransom book, because it's, like, because who's thinking about, like, I don't look for King's Ransom. I'm looking for Spider-Man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, come on. Yeah, yeah, I don't know. Like, to me, like, this was very poorly marketed, on top of everything else.
Well, I mean, just to like magnify that, this is like a really culminating issue, like so many storylines get wrapped up here, not to mention the King's Ransom one. Although, given the way this book has been written and released, I don't think you could really feel like you missed out on a ton, because it felt like the story kind of mini concluded in the last issue of Amazing. Like, yeah, we didn't get the answer to the Boomerang thing, but Boomerang stories and arcs of this book have ended in similar ways before. So, like, a lot of people probably just assumed we're just moving on. So I think a lot of people are going to miss this book and not realize that they've missed it until they pick up issue 67 or whatever it is we've got coming next. And I think that's a real miss. So I just can't really understand the reasonings behind this. It's just really odd to me. And it just, again, further underlines my big question of, like, what is going on in Spider-Man editorial?
Yeah. No, I mean, we could talk about that all night, Dan. But,
Maybe
alas,
maybe that's our
giant
300th
size issue to get
episode.
to.
Yeah. So let me just detail really quickly my struggles to get a copy of this issue, because this was like
stuff.
This is pretty interesting. So I showed up at my local comic book shop and picked up my copy of it, and the guy behind the counter was like, who reads Amazing Spider-Man, and we kind of have a repartee about it. He was like, man, this was a really letdown of an issue. It was really poorly written. It almost made no sense. And I said, oh, that's funny. I thought the reaction that I'd been seeing online, but, this guy's usually pretty on the money about these things. But he's even more down on Spider-Man than I am, because he freely drops it left and right. And anyway, so I picked up this book and I was really eager to read it. So during a break at work, I cracked it open, and within the first few pages, I was like, what is going on with this story? Like, it was, I had the first page, and then it looked like a half of a spread. I was like, it looks like I'm missing. He's just talking to the Defenders, and suddenly they're fighting all these mob bosses. Did I miss something? But I was like, no, this is how Spencer writes these things. It's like timey-wimey, like we're jumping in and out of time. Right. So, like, this must just been a particularly rough transition. And I kept reading, but then I got to a point where I was like, this is really confusing. But now we're starting to get the same pages again. Like, why am I reading the same pages all over again? This can't be right. So eventually I just kept reading, and I'm like, this must be a misprint, but maybe if I, ignore these extra pages, I'm going to be okay. And for the most part, I kind of got through the story and was like, all right, but there was no conclusion with Kingpin. There was like none of that stuff. It just suddenly jumped into a preview of Black Cat, and I was like, what am I reading? So clearly it was a massive misprint, which it was. The book is printed twice in my issue, but it's only half the book. So I've got half of it in one issue. So I called the store back, and every issue they had there was the same. So every copy was like this. So I was like, I got to go see if I can find this book somewhere else, because I want to have an actual... Now, here's the sucker that I am, Mark. I went out to give them more money because I have to read this issue, You
messed up. Let me give you more money.
Right. So, okay. So they're like, my comic book shop was like, we have to, call these defective and return them and everything. But that doesn't help me out, because one, I got this show to do, and two, I already think this issue is going to be in short supply. So I call up another comic book shop, and I'm like, hey, this is going to sound like a really weird question, but do you have a copy of giant-sized Amazing Spider-Man King's Ransom #1 that you can get out for me? And they're like, I think we have like 3 copies of that book. And I was like, okay, well, first of all, I was like, mental note, flag that for discussion on the show that not many people are carrying many copies of this book. But two, because this is how I think. And two,
Right.
they got the book and I said, okay, now I'm going to ask you a really weird question. Can you flip through it and make sure that like it's not misprinted? Because I have a massive misprint in mine. Because at this point, I didn't know if this was like a localized thing or if this was widespread or whatever. So they flipped through it and they're like, no, we have one that's totally fine. And I was like, okay, great. I'll come out there after work and come pick it up. So I go to the comic book shop. I go in. It's a new shop, so that's kind of fun. And they hand me the issue. And of course, I brought in my issue to compare it because I was like, I want to make sure that this is, you know, the real deal, you know? So I open it up and I'm like, nope, this one is misprinted too. Completely different store on the other side of town. Also a misprint, the same misprint. And so then all the customers start like huddling around me because they have to see this thing. So suddenly there's like collectors that are like, hey, do you have any other copies of the ones with the misprints? I got to own the ones with the misprint, you know.
Got to get my blue lizard variant.
Right. And the owner's like, I've seen misprints before, but they never typically sell for that much more. So I don't know. But I'm like, I just want to read this damn story. So we go through all their issues and they're all misprinted the same way. Except what we realized was the variants were not misprinted. So I ended up picking a variant, which is going to end up going back to Marvel as another variant sale. We got to keep this business practice. Here's the new business practice, Mark. I'm saying is we make the variants right. We misprint all the normal issues and we get double sales from people that really care. But otherwise, there are people like I don't know how my comic shop, like now I'm really doubting his opinion because he read through it and didn't realize it was a misprint. I don't know how.
Yeah. I mean, it's like kind of how I was when I in college. I had a Virginia Woolf book I had to read, and apparently it was missing 20 pages in the middle, and I didn't realize it. And I was just like, I don't know, it's just the usual Virginia Woolf blather.
So anyway, I now have an issue that I can read, but I don't actually own a copy of the original right cover. And now I'm like, do I go and buy that? Like, is my collection complete?
Dan, you're done. I'm just going to hold it over your head that you don't have an original first print normal cover issue and thus your collection's not complete. But otherwise, don't do it.
Well, I mean, to me, it's worth the $6 to not have you do that. So then Kyle Kreis, one of our listeners and former collaborators, was like, I'll drive one over to you because he lives in LA and his were okay. So he's like, I can get you a copy. And I'm like, okay, Kyle, I don't really think that that's necessary. But anyway, it's a whole thing.
Okay.
But here's the other cherry on top is that the digital codes were all broken too. So even if I wanted to read it digitally, I couldn't. Although apparently they started working today. Who knows? This is a whole kerfuffle. Okay, that's my story. I got it over with. But I was able to eventually read this story.
All right. Well, speaking of which, why don't we talk a little bit about this story? I was going to say briefly, but it's a long story. But you know, let's hit the highlights, Dan, before we both pass out here.
Yeah,
from
sure.
Our double shift here. You know, so I mean, let's first talk kind of about a little bit about what happened at the end of the last issue and how it ties into here, which was this team up between Spider-Man and the new Avengers, or was it Defenders? I mean, the funny thing is, you and I both questioned that last week, and they made joke of it here. You know, in terms of team ups here, this, you know, outside of like them all saying, "Oh, I hate that guy," and regarding Boomerang, I didn't quite get what the purpose of bringing in all these other characters were, because they were used so sparingly and it didn't go anywhere.
Right. I mean, they fight against the mob leaders, which is a way to, I guess, wrap up that storyline. But yeah, I mean, I think there was probably another way to do this. And I think, again, like like a good editor would probably say, maybe we don't need to bring in these characters. But, you know, at the same time, I could see an editor saying, we need to bring these characters in because we have to do some cross-promotion of some kind. So, but this doesn't really seem like significant cross-promotion, so it's really hard to say. I will say, to skip ahead, there is a nice beat where Spider-Man kind of realizes that he's been so wrapped up in his own drama that he hasn't really been attending to his friendships. as he's trying to kind of convince them of this whole boomerang thing. It worked for me, while also feeling a little bit hollow, because this whole book is about Spider-Man's friendship with Boomerang and the amount of time he's put into that. So it doesn't feel altogether like Spider-Man is totally ignoring his friends if he's been able to make a new friend that is at the heart of this very story that we're reading. So I was like, okay, nice beat. I think the story you're telling kind of essentially undermines that beat in its very nature.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, and again, when it comes to Spider-Man's friends, I don't know if I think about these characters as much, but whatever, it's fine. I do think like kind of the arc of Spider-Man and Boomerang here is fun stuff. I mean, obviously, yeah, when as it starts, we Kingpin is of course still sending everyone after Boomerang, including lawyer, but and it's like the mob bosses are they're getting tipped off by Kingpin, but they're also meeting with their lawyers, which just seems like a very like Nick Spencer's head joke, but it worked. I kind of chuckled at it when it was like, and lawyers, like but yeah, I mean. What are you thinking of kind of like the setup into actually getting into the drama here, Dan?
Well, I like this kind of, and this is why I feel like this story maybe could have fit well in like a 3-issue thing, is because I think the way that it fits in this book is actually really elegant. That we spend like pages setting up the history of Spider-Man's relationship with Boomerang from Spider-Man's perspective, right? That like how he's seen Boomerang change, and spoiler for the end of this book. We weren't getting the full story. And so I think it was smart for him to recap this here in these kind of elegant, spreads, the classic using the Dr. Octopus tentacles to divide a page. Although in this case, I believe it's like the female Dr. Octopus's tentacles that are wrapped around Boomerang. But I thought first of all, the layout was nice, but second, I think it's a good way to structure a book. And, anyway, I thought this was a good economic use of the space that he had to create this kind of elegant reveal.
Yeah. And then, I think the other big kind of push we got in this comic to kind of wrap some things up here was regarding the suit. And, we've kind of been talking about this since its introduction, like, where are we truly going with it? Are they utilizing it the right way? And kind of the moral of the story regarding Spider-Man's new costume was kind of like, Jonah had other plans, right?
Right. So it's revealed that like Jonah was using this to like not only because I still think he legitimately is trying to help Spider-Man out, but he also is using it like Robbie hinted at as like a PR campaign to basically suggest that newspaper is dead and Threats and Menaces the new thing. But then that evolves into this new pro Spider Slayers thing where users can occupy a spider robot, which we've seen, Jonah kind of utilized before, right? With his like Spider Slayer police squad during Spider Island. I mean, this seems like a kind of like retread of that idea. And people can kind of get in on the action with, not only can you watch Spider-Man, now you can kind of be Spider-Man. And Mark, I got to say, I really didn't like this for a number of reasons. First of all, that it seemed like a retread of both Spider Island, but also like, did we forget about the Hunters plotline from just like 20 issues ago, where we had this essentially same exact idea of people? I mean, these were less, more malevolent forces occupying these things. But like, did we need another retread of this kind of idea? I also think that Jonah would never name something pro Spider Slayers. This guy killed his wife, and Jonah kind of went off the deep end about it for a long time. I can't imagine him even humoring that idea. So it seems like cheeky in a way to kind of destroy the character. And then I also think like just in terms of like this story, I'm sure we're gonna like revisit it at some point. Although it also seems like maybe, who could tell? This could be the end of this storyline here, but it goes nowhere and has almost nothing to do with the story of King's Ransom. And I think it also like suggests that the Threats and Menaces suit, which is we'll talk about later when it's kind of erased from the storyline, there was no mining of the dramatic potential. Like if this was the dramatic potential that this suit had, I feel like it totally missed the mark of like what it could have done with people watching Peter be Spider-Man and Jonah being the guy in the chair for Spider-Man. I just felt like what a major whiff on all fronts.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with pretty much everything you said there. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, even Jonah's entire characterization here. I mean, I get that, and they did set this up in some of the previous issues, but like, I'm also just not buying just how much like, is it that Jonah wants to bury print, or does he want his own success? And that's to me, kind of what's in question here. And why I don't totally buy like that. He's just like, it's not, he's not going all out so he can advance himself. He seems like he's going all out just to destroy the Daily Bugle. And I mean, I guess I don't know. I guess that's kind of within Jonah's character, but it just feels kind of in recent years outside the realm of the character. So like, yeah, I mean, to what you're saying, none of this was working for me. It's just like, I don't know. Like I had no interest in Jonah and his turn here. I mean, the only kind of thing I kind of chuckled at was that that Threats and Menaces gets an acronym now. It's TNM.
Yeah,
like
they still have
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Wait, no, that's not it.
They still haven't updated their really bad logo, which is just like the least aesthetically pleasing thing ever. But and I got a chuckle out of like one of the people operating one of the bots is like a little boy blowing like bubble gum. Like that made me laugh, too, in terms of like a visual gag. But like this was just not the evolution of this plot line that I was hoping for, even if it was a new idea, but it also feels like a real retread. Spencer, come on, man, you're not running out of ideas already.
Right.
So, Spidey chases down the sewers while his friends kind of fight the mob bosses up above. And he goes down the sewers to find Boomerang, which weirdly has drawn him back to Gog or whatever has guided him back there, which is the original location of the previous tablet piece that they saw where they fought Vermin. I don't know why it needed to be in this spot again. It seemed like an odd beat. But he finds Fred there, who, this scene is really interesting with 2020 hindsight. But, Fred, who's got rocket boots, can't climb the rocks, and he seems all pathetic, and he's really down on himself and saying like, I always screw up. I'm always the problem. And he's like really pulling a Spider-Man. And reading it through a first time, I was like, okay, this is interesting. We're really positioning Myers to be like a Spider-Man adjacent. And, obviously if you reread this issue, it's for good reason. What do you think of this moment?
Yeah, no, I mean, like, yeah, at the time, it felt like an interesting juxtaposition to have. I mean, it also kind of like demonstrated what we saw last issue, like Boomerang's kind of obliviousness to those around him, that he would be, of all characters, bemoaning to Spider-Man, like, you don't know what it's like to feel like you constantly let people down.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like it worked in that vein, per what they were setting up in previous issues, but then it also ended up working in terms of the swerve that's coming later. So I mean, I enjoyed it. I liked kind of sympathizing with Boomerang, but also laughing at him. And then, frankly, I also then enjoyed watching Fred's former partner show up to kick his butt.
Yeah. I think for me, like that previous scene, before we move on to the Boomerang Revenge Squad, the highlight of the scene looking back on it, is there's a great panel of a close-up of Fred smiling. And, at first you're like, okay, he's been really picked up by Spider-Man. But rereading it, you realize he's smiling because he's pulling one over on Spider-Man, and it's like it's a cool kind of thing where this same image can be read two different ways.
Yep.
And that makes like the Fred stuff more fun. So you're right. So then the Boomerang Revenge Squad, consisting of the Shocker, Hydro Man, and Speed Demon, show up to kind of like stop them, on behest of, I think they're working for the Kingpin, or they say they're working for the Kingpin, to kind of stop them from getting to the tablet. And of course they get their butts kicked by Spider-Man and Boomerang.
Yep, and then we have Felicia shows up and she's disguised as Kingpin's doctor. Great master of disguise there. And she steals the tablets and brings them to Spider-Man and Boomerang until and I'm laughing because the scene itself is making me laugh, but then also, Dan, your notes here is making me laugh. A ghost shows up. I mean, like let's talk about some secret scrolls maybe. I don't know. It's on the level. And the ghost tells they cast a spell on Boomerang and says certain death will befall anyone who touches the tablet that's not a quote unquote true hero. So who is the only true hero in the room that can save the day, Dan?
Well, it's Spider-Man, but I gotta say, like, when I read my like messed up issue, it's like I read this and like I was like, well, clearly I'm missing some major backstory to this that's established and that I didn't get to read because my issue was so misprinted. I was like, this ghost thing must be set up in the issue. So then when I got the actual issue and there was no real setup to the ghost, at least at that point, I was like, what is this? Why is there a random ghost now? And the characters don't really react like, whoa, what the heck, a ghost? Like Spider-Man's
yeah, right?
like, oh, clearly there's a ghost attached to this thing.
I mean, why not? I mean, we're in a superhero universe, Dan, but yeah, ghost.
I don't know. Did you have the same reaction I did? I was just like, what is this now? Like, I could care less about this.
Yeah, I mean, like, I wasn't like super duper incredulous about it, but I was definitely just like, wait, what? Like, who is this character? Like, what are we trying to establish here? There's just a lot of random plot beats in this story. I mean, like, nothing like that offensive to my sensibilities, but like stuff that just seems really random. And this was kind of a top of the random list.
Yeah, I mean, is it your understanding that this is like the ghost of the archivist? Like, that's what I imagined it was, because, or like at least a spell ghost of the archivist, because he's got like glasses on and like, I'm like,
Yeah, I think you're right, but like it's just like it's still random, completely random.
yeah. So okay, so then Spidey webs up Boomerang and like gives him the speech like, I think you're a hero, but we better not like
Better not chance it.
Yeah, right. So and then Jonah pipes in, like still on Spidey's side, and seeing his like kind of spider bots destroy all this property and kind of fall on their faces immediately, kind of like that plot point. But Jonah then like kind of peps up Spider-Man and is like, this is your big chance to show everyone that you're a true hero. Like, we can redeem this thing. And Spider-Man is like, no. And he has a realization that like it's his relationship with money is complicated, and actually like having money and fame hasn't actually helped him in the past. Even all the way back to Amazing Fantasy 15, and that like that kind of pursuit has led him to mistakes. It's not a part who he is. So he renounces the Threats and Menaces suit. And in my mind, I guess this is the end of the Threats and Menaces suit. And he returns to his classic red and blues and shuts down the broadcast. So let's talk about this as what I perceive to be the conclusion of the Threats and Menaces suit. How did you react to this moment?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, like I actually found it to be a little visually confusing when he was kind of renouncing the suit, but like, like, bringing up like, oh, my complicated relationship with money. I mean, again, like, not to repeat myself from just a few minutes ago, but like these beats all just seem to kind of, I kind of feel like we're playing Mad Libs with Spider-Man here. I mean, nothing is that far fetched, but like we're kind of just throwing random different plot beats out there to see what can stick and what doesn't. And like, I don't know, like if this is how we're gonna get rid of the suit, like kind of tying it into the complicated nature of fame and money. I don't know, like it just feels like such a missed opportunity at every chance. I mean, like you could have done so much more with this, and had a more dramatic conclusion to why you would have gotten to this point, rather than like, on second thought, I shouldn't do this. Money and me don't mix. I don't know. I mean, I might just being overly glib about it, but it really didn't do it for me, Dan.
No, I don't think you are. Like, I think like it's funny because you're seeing like the skeleton of a moment that could really have been powerful. Like, because it is true. Like that Spider-Man and fame and stuff often doesn't go well. I even think about like this Sam Raimi Spider-Man 3 movie and what fame brings him in that, and the repercussions of that. Like, it's someone that's very, like, Nick Spencer's clearly knowledgeable about possible themes that you can explore in Spider-Man comic. But the point is, this theme wasn't explored in the pages of this book. And if that was something that wanted to be part of this whole climax and really have some like real meaning behind it, we shouldn't have spent the time on Robbie and Tombstone, but actually exploring the drama that this suit provided, both in terms of like financial drama for Spider-Man and, what he's compromising, or like his relationship with Jonah in his head. But we never really got any drama out of that. So like this decision is just as like, it seems just as much like frivolous as the introduction of the costume in the first place, which is just like, well, I got it as abruptly as I'm giving it up. And, instead, I think about this versus like the end of, and this is a really hard comparison, but look, this is a giant sized issue. Amazing Spider-Man 300 and the return of the red and blues there, where it has actual like real thematic meaning. Here, like there's potential for that. And I like the visual of him getting rid of it and him, being declared a true hero, but there's no weight behind it, like you were saying. So, again, like you said, a missed opportunity. So, right. So Spider-Man, goodbye. I guess the other question is, do you think this is the end of the Threats and Menaces suit?
Yeah, I think it's over. I don't think we're going to be spending much more time with this. So
that's super lame.
Yeah. I mean, here we are, Dan. Sorry.
So he grabs the tablet and passes and proclaims Spider-Man a true hero after all, as if there was any doubt.
Right.
And that's the end of the story, right? Like all is well and good.
They save the tablet, except the Revenge Squad comes back. Speed Demon, I think, in fact, was the Speed Demon steal it and then punch him out? Well, whatever. Spider-Man gets knocked out, doesn't understand how they get free. Where's Boomerang? And then what do we find, Dan?
Well, Boomerang is standing over Spidey's body, and he's got a bit of a look on his face, and you're like, well, I should have seen this coming. Peter wakes up back in his destroyed apartment with Felicia, which then made me question, like, well, where was Felicia in all of that? Maybe there's a line I missed, but like, was she not there during this whole thing? Didn't she show up with the other tablet piece? Like, where did she dip out to?
Yeah, I don't think you missed anything. I think we just kind of jumped.
Okay, well, so then she just decides, like, oh, sorry, I wasn't paying attention for a minute. Let me pick up Spider-Man's body and return him home. And so, like, he's back in his apartment. And, of course, Fred has left him a note. And this note details a sort of alternate history where this was all a setup from Boomerang all along. He had been pulling one long con because the archivist was murdered by some of Kingpin's cronies, and in his dying breath put a spell, which is where the ghost came from, on the final piece of the tablet that he knew that Boomerang wouldn't be able to overcome because he knew Boomerang wasn't, in fact, a true hero. And that we had been reading a long con this whole time, and it reveals all the little bits and pieces that we had gotten of how we should have put this story together. And honestly, Mark, this really worked for me. I didn't say it on the show, but I'm not even sure if I told it to you. And so this is going to sound like me, like 2020 inventing this. Like, oh, I knew this all along. I had been really thinking that this was where we were going. And so I felt good reading this. And I think that means it's a kind of a good reveal. How did you feel about this reveal?
Yeah, I mean, I was disappointed only because I liked what the dynamic was between Spider-Man and Boomerang to this point. But like I mean, it's totally sensible and totally logical. And even like when, Fred is, doing the I'm going to explain my plan to you routine, it's outlandish in that comic book way, but it makes sense. I mean, there's nothing, like, I mean, he played the long game. He took advantage of Peter Parker's quote unquote relationship with Spider-Man to kind of get it in. And then, he worked his connections from there. So, totally logical. Didn't see it coming, but like when it happened, I was like, yep, I mean, I'm sad, but that works.
I like the emotional element of it too. Like the note itself the note existing essentially is saying like, hey, I care enough about our relationship to tell you more about this. And you get these great images of like him back at the bar with no name and all of the superior foes or whatever, all cheersing him, like he's a new hero to them. But then you see this kind of like, he's not ecstatic about it. And you see this sad look on his face as the final image. And I thought it was really poignant to see him so upset about like his decision that, because he really was this close to, actually becoming a hero. And it makes you kind of look back on the scene where he's reaching out towards the tablet. And you almost wonder, like, was he reaching out there with the intent of touching it and really seeing if he'd become a hero after all? I know that he probably was counting on Spider-Man stopping him, but part of me thinks that, like, if he had taken one more step forward, he would have been regarded as a hero for the actions that he did. Some of his, like, saving Peter Parker in the bar with no name when Scorcher was blasting at him and sacrificing himself selflessly like that. In the another lookout moment.
Another lookout.
Yeah. He's almost a victim of his reputation too. Like Spider-Man's lack of faith in his heroism is kind of what stops him from achieving and maybe actually turning good. Because I feel like if he had gotten that true hero proclamation, there was still an opportunity for Fred to undo all of this and that. So I wonder if we'll revisit that in some way. That, like, in a way, it's Spider-Man's fault for not believing in Fred a little bit more for this all kind of happening. Hey, look, any opportunity to lay it at the hands of Spider-Man's feet or whatever, I think these books go for. But did you have that kind of same feeling like about all this?
Oh yeah, I mean, like it's well depicted both visually and then through the script. I mean, like you're feeling the remorse and you're feeling like, if only this was a different timeline, I could have had that redemption. But no, it was a good arc for the character. Whether you wanted to see it as a fan or not, it was a well executed arc for Fred.
And I think in terms of payoffs, I think this bodes well maybe for Kindred, but I do think that like the Fred story really benefited in this being a very long, drawn out thing, actually, because it allowed you to invest in that friendship a little bit more. Whereas I feel like right now, my feeling is the Kindred thing does not adhere to that ideology.
Right. So as Spider-Man is recapping all this to the new Avengers, of course, he's kind of just like throwing his hands in the air, being like, well, what's the worst that happens? Kingpin's just gonna resurrect Vanessa anyway, like he always wants to do. Except what does he actually do, Dan?
Yeah, so he's not actually looking to resurrect Vanessa, it turns out. When he went to Kindred in the catacombs of Paris, Kindred told him no, but he also told him, like, hey, like, what makes you think Vanessa would want that? It's
Yeah.
kind of like that Grim Hunt thing with Kindred, which is like, you can bring him back, but that doesn't mean that's what he wanted. And of course,
Yeah.
when we revisit that, like, Vanessa Fisk was the one that killed Richard Fisk. And that was kind of like why she died, because she died of like Padme syndrome, which
Yeah.
is just
Right.
the broken heart. So like that was like, she, like, bringing her back wouldn't undo the action she had to take on Kingpin's behalf. So the twist isn't that he's bringing her back; it's that he's going to undo that thing. He's going to bring back Richard Fisk, aka the Rose, or like the original the Rose.
Right.
Um,
Me, not the Hobgoblin.
yeah, yeah, right. That will be an interesting thing to revisit. Like maybe they can finally switch places or something like
Right.
that.
There you go.
Yeah, what do you think of this big twist reveal?
I mean, I tip my hat to um not going with the obvious. I mean, the fact that it was so obvious that even Spider-Man was like, he just wants to bring back Vanessa. So I mean, I tip my hat for doing something different. I mean, what does Richard Fisk or the Rose, whatever you want to classify them as, coming back really do for Amazing Spider-Man or the Spider-Man universe going forward? I don't know. I mean, it's fine. I don't. I mean, it's from an era of comics that I really enjoyed, but the same token, I don't know how it fits into this one. So, I guess wait and see. But I wasn't like, oh my goodness, this is the coolest thing ever when I got to it. So,
It does have a little more power for me than like bringing back the Sin Eater. Um,
yeah,
yeah, I'm interested to see where this goes at the very least. I mean, giving Kingpin some kind of like someone to play off of in an interesting way that's his own son, that's complicated, could be interesting. I'm curious to see how this affects the Daredevil comics, where
yeah.
Kingpin plays an even bigger role, and if this will be reflected there. Yeah, I mean, I like the swerve because we were for so long like, well, it's even before they said it was Vanessa, we thought it was Vanessa. And that was a clever one, Nick Spencer. I'm giving it to him for that. So that's the end of the book. I guess we got like a Black Cat preview, which we're not going to talk about here because it's literally just pages of that book. If it gets people to pick up Black Cat, great, because that's a great comic. We didn't really talk about the art much. Do you have any thoughts on the art in this issue? I thought it was really kind of just standard.
Yeah, I mean, it was fun at parts. I mean, there was nothing in there that, not like last issue, nothing that really called out to me and made me excited visually, but nothing that I thought was poorly done either. Like I said, I think you caught the visual sequencing of the costume reveal or renouncement better than I did. Like I had to kind of look at it a few times to kind of catch it. That was probably the most critical part for me. But otherwise, it was fine.
All right, Mark. We're gonna give this book a grade. Why don't you get us started here?
Yeah. Oh, you're making me go first for a change. I mean, honestly, like, yeah, I don't love the length. I don't love the format. I didn't have the problems you had getting it, but like, man, do I feel for you. That would really like piss me off if I was if this was my situation. But I'm still gonna give it a B minus. I think this is pretty decent stuff. The boomerang reveal was clever enough to work for me on that end, even though there was a lot of other stuff in this issue that didn't work a lot for me. So B minus for me.
I want to echo your sentiments exactly. It's a B minus for me for exactly the same reasons and all the other ones that we presented. Yeah, I mean, I think getting a good ending to these stories does do a lot to redeem, some of the ups and downs we've been through. And that makes me kind of happy about issues like this.
Definitely. All right, Dan. Well, It is, of course, that time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning in to this episode of The Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, as always, this episode was edited by Rick Coast with production support from Andy Myers. Our artwork comes handcrafted by artists Ron Friend, Sal Buscema, and Ray Sumser. Our theme songs were produced by Rylan Bojack, Tony Thaxton, and Spider Madge. This episode itself was originally released on Patreon as a live stream hangout with us back when the comic was first released. So, if you'd like to help support our show's continued existence and these reviews while joining us on the live stream, why not head on over to our Patreon and sign up? There's just a link down in your description there, and you can come join us on Patreon. So, Mark, until you start pulling centipedes out of your ears, what's our motto?
Our motto is, with great podcasts, there must also come the amazing Spider Talk.
Too many who know the angles, uncover and untangle all the questions and the webs left out to tangle. In 1962, last Wednesday's afternoon, they'll bend your ears with reckless self-abandon.